Yo, what's up YouTube? Welcome to Tricky Jim. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new here, my name's Andrew Mahone. I'm a world-class Pokemon TCG player, and today I am creating this video from home since my new studio is very much under construction, but it should be finished up within the next couple of weeks. We've got some very exciting news about TCG Pocket. There is a new mini set, Mythical Island, which will release on Tuesday, December 17th. It's a mini set, so unlike the Genetic Apex main set, which has 3 different booster packs with 3 different card selections in them, this will feature just 1 booster pack with Mew as its featured Pokemon, and will have a smaller selection of cards in it. 15 new cards were revealed in the trailer today, including 2 new Pokemon EX, Mew EX, and Aerodactyl EX. In today's video, I'm going to go over how these new cards will impact your favorite decks in the Pokemon TCG Pocket. But before we get to it, let's hear a word from my sponsor, Full Grip Games. If collecting digital cards on Pokemon TCG Pocket has you itching to start a physical Pokemon TCG collection, make sure to check out FullGripGames.com. FullGripGames.com is the best place to buy Pokemon trading card game singles and sealed products. Full Grip has a huge selection of Pokemon cards to choose from that spans the entire history of the Pokemon TCG. Full Grip has super fast shipping and fantastic service. It really is the best place to buy trading card game singles. Shopping at FullGripGames.com directly supports the content that I create here on Tricky Jim. So thank you so much for buying and selling at FullGripGames.com. Let's get right down to it. Mew is the featured Pokemon on the front of the Mythical Island booster pack and seems to be the main character of this mini set, and Mew EX certainly does not disappoint. This is a very strong Pokemon card that is going to be a total game changer in the Pokemon TCG Pocket format. It has 130 hit points and 2 great attacks. Size Shot costs 1 Psychic Energy and does 20 damage, really strong for early turns and softening up the opponent's Pokemon. And then Genome Hacking costs 3 colorless energy and allows you to choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks to use as this attack. This is amazing for copying Mewtwo EX's Psy Drive attack and Charizard EX's Crimson Storm, but could be used to copy any strong attack that you want to use as your own. It's really good for copying Mewtwo EX's Psy Drive and Charizard's Crimson Storm because it one-hit KOs the Pokemon that it is copying for less energy than the original attack's cost. And I've seen quite a few questions about how Mew EX is going to interact with those attacks, since Mewtwo EX's Psy Drive attack says that you have to discard 2 Psychic Energy from this Pokemon, and Charizard EX's Crimson Storm says discard 2 Fire Energy from this Pokemon. Mew doesn't necessarily have to have Psychic or Fire Energy attached to it, and the way that Pokemon cards work when you use an attack and don't have any of the energy or other things going on to pay an attack cost, you just do as much as you can. So if Mew copies Mewtwo's Psy Drive and doesn't have Psychic Energy attached to it, you don't have to discard any Psychic Energy attached to it, but you still perform the attack and do the 150 damage. If Mew doesn't have any Fire Energy attached to it, then it can just use Charizard's Crimson Storm for 200 damage and not have to discard any energy. The only circumstance in the Pokemon TCG where something like this would be disqualifying would be if the attack said you have to discard 2 Fire Energy or else this attack does nothing, or something like that. Anyways, Mew gets to copy these very powerful attacks for less energy than the attack's cost, and Mew is obviously a perfect fit in Gardevoir Mewtwo EX decks. Gardevoir Mewtwo is already one of the best decks in TCG Pocket, but now with Mew EX, the deck gets even stronger since it has an easy way to one-hit KO Charizard EX, which previously was one of the only Pokemon that Mewtwo could not one-hit KO. But with Mew EX, you could just copy Crimson Storm, and boom, the Charizard is gone. And you can easily accelerate energy onto Mew EX with Gardevoir's Psy Shadow ability, making it a perfect fit for the deck. I do think that Mew EX is such a strong Pokemon that it'll probably see play outside of Gardevoir decks, even without that energy acceleration. And the reason for that is that Mew EX gives any deck the ability to one-hit KO opposing Mewtwo EX and Charizard EX. And that is just a really powerful option for a lot of decks, especially if they're not super tight on their energy attachments, since Mew EX is going to eat up 3 energy attachments itself. But since Genome Hacking costs 3 colorless energy, the card can easily be splashed into any deck. Up next, we've got Vaporeon, which seems like it's going to be a huge boost for Water-type decks. This is a Stage 1 Pokemon with 120 hit points and the amazing Wash Out ability, which allows you to move a Water energy from your bench Water Pokemon to your active Water Pokemon as often as you like during your turn. So this is going to give Water decks total flexibility with their energy, and I think this card pairs perfectly with my favorite Water card, Starmie EX. Starmie EX is one of the best leads in TCG Pocket, threatening 90 damage on the second turn of the game, and the card has free retreat, which is its strongest asset. I feel like Vaporeon is the perfect partner for Starmie, since you can lead Starmie and put pressure on the opponent, soak a hit, and then pivot into a new attacker and just move all of your energy to the fresh attacker with Vaporeon's washout ability. And with that free retreat and energy mobility, you're not going to be held back by the success of your Misty Flips, which I know I am going to be very thankful for. With Water decks having less pressure on their energy thanks to Vaporeon, this could open the door for them to play a card like Mew EX, even though you can't use Vaporeon's washout ability to move energy to Mew EX. Unfortunately, you could still manually attach energy to Mew EX while using Vaporeon's washout ability to move energy to your Water Pokemon, and then have Mew EX as a closer if you needed to one-hit KO Mewtwo EX or Charizard EX. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Vaporeon is huge! It's a single prize Pokemon that has 120 hit points. To compare, Starmie EX only has 130 hit points and gives up 2 prizes when it gets knocked out. Vaporeon is a very chunky single prizer, and it has an attack Wave Splash, which does 60 damage for a Water and 2 colorless energy, making it a very capable attacker in this deck. So I really love the balance of Vaporeon, and I think it's just going to be an all-star in these Water decks. Moving on to the fighting cards. First up, we've got Aerodactyl EX, which I'm sure everybody is very excited about, but I hate to break it to you, it is not the strongest fighting Pokemon revealed so far from Mythical Island. Aerodactyl EX is just okay. It's a Stage 1 Pokemon EX that has 140 hit points, and for a fighting and a colorless energy, its Land Crush attack does 80 damage. Something that I'm sure we all wish Marowak EX could consistently do, instead of flipping double tails all the time. Aerodactyl EX also comes with the neat ability, Primeval Law, which says your opponent can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their active Pokemon. So it's kind of minorly disruptive, as your opponent could always just evolve up their Pokemon on the bench and then promote it into the active spot to play around Aerodactyl. Now, Aerodactyl will force your opponent to have those pivot cards like X Speed and the new supporter card Leaf, which I'll get to a bit later. But I don't really see Primeval Law being a consistent game-breaking ability. Usually Gardevoir is just sitting on the bench anyhow, so it's not really going to matter if your opponent can't evolve Kirlia into Gardevoir in the active spot. Similarly, Charizard is usually sitting behind Moltres EX, so it doesn't really matter if your opponent can't evolve Charmeleon into Charizard in the active spot. Of course, there are going to be those situations where your opponent is banking on top decking a Charizard and they don't have an X Speed or anything like that, and they have to promote Charmeleon, and oh no, there's an Aerodactyl EX in the active spot. But like, for the most part, I don't really see this being a game-breaking ability. And 80 damage for 2 energy is just not all that great. Both Starmie and Pikachu EX do 90 damage for 2 energy. So in the realm of damage output, Aerodactyl is just outclassed. On top of all of that, Aerodactyl EX evolves from Old Amber, which is a fossil card that you can't search out with Pokeball, making it one of the least consistent Stage 1 options to build your deck around. Aerodactyl EX might be mid, but Marshadow is absolutely not. This little dude rocks. It's got the Revenge attack, which costs a fighting and a colorless energy, and it does 40 damage plus 60 more damage if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during the previous turn. And guess what, folks? This attack one-hit KOs Pikachu EX for just 2 energy. All that is required is that one of your Pokemon was knocked out the previous turn. Let's go, Marshadow. Finally, we've got a fighting Pokemon that actually does something. And something that I think is really interesting about Marshadow is that its Revenge attack costs a fighting and a colorless energy, which means that if you wanted to run the risk of splitting your energy pool, which is kind of its own can of worms, but if you were playing a deck that was okay with splitting its energy pool, then you could run Marshadow and use it as a tech option to knock out Pikachu EX. And I like that. I think that's cool. We also got a glimpse of a new Pikachu, which will be a strict upgrade on the old Pikachu for anyone running Raichu in their Lightning deck. And if you watched my top 5 decks in TCG Pocket video, then you know that I think that the best way to play Pikachu EX is with Raichu and Lieutenant Surge. Pikachu has its own version of the Circle Circuit attack, which costs 1 lightning energy and does 10 damage for each of your bench lightning Pokemon, so it can do 30 damage for just 1 energy. This is just a solid lead for lightning decks, and Raichu is already a really good Pokemon worth including, so this just makes the lightning deck a little bit better. Dedenne might not seem like much. It's a basic Pokemon with 60 hit points, and the Thunder Shock attack, which costs 1 lightning energy, does 10 damage, and you flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed. Now, if you watched my video on how to win games with special conditions, then you know that paralysis is the strongest special condition, and as it is right now, there is no way to heal special conditions outside of evolving your Pokemon, so inflicting paralysis essentially buys you an extra turn. And one of the major weaknesses of Pikachu EX decks is that you don't have a way to accelerate extra energy into play. So what Dedenne can do is buy you an extra turn by inflicting paralysis, and then you get that extra turn to attach another energy. And with Lieutenant Surge and Raichu, you can actually use the energy that you have on Dedenne, move it onto Raichu, and take a big game-winning knockout with Raichu after buying yourself a turn with Dedenne. The math even checks out. You can use Dedenne's Thunder Shock on a Mewtwo EX and then finish it off with 140 damage from Raichu. I really love what Dedenne does for the Lightning deck. I feel like it gives it some real comeback potential, which is something it didn't have previously, and gives you a way to disrupt the flow of the game, which I think will just make matches more interesting, since it's less about who gets out to the lead first and just draws better and wins. There's a handful of other Pokemon that were also revealed, but I don't think that any of them are as good or interesting as the Pokemon that I have already covered. Tauros has the Fighting Tackle attack, which does 40 damage plus 80 more damage if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon EX. So it does one-hit KO Pikachu EX, but it costs 3 colorless energy, and Tauros is a single prize Pokemon that only has 100 HP. I think you're better off using your precious energy attachments on stronger attackers. The new Magmar could be a decent add to Blaine's decks, but honestly, I think the old Magmar is just better. This new Magmar, you have to discard 2 fire energy from it in order to do 80 damage, and it really kind of messes with the flow of the Blaine's decks, which are supposed to be low to the ground and capable of attacking every single turn. If this Magmar were to get stuck in the active spot, you're not putting enough pressure on your opponent's Pokemon, so I think you're better off just doing 50 damage for 2 fire energy with the old Magmar. This Execute is a nice upgrade for anybody running Exeggutor. It's got an attack that accelerates an extra energy to it, but both of the Exeggutor that exist right now have attacks that only cost 1 energy, so what's the point of accelerating an extra energy to your Execute? I guess Exeggutor EX and Exeggutor have really fat retreat costs, so you can accelerate an extra energy to your Execute with the hope of maybe eventually retreating, or maybe there will be a superior card that can move energy around. But I guess they just revealed Vaporeon, which kind of already does that, so I doubt it, but maybe. They did reveal a Morlul, so Shiinotic is a card that's going to be in this set as well. Shiinotic could also have an ability that helps you to get your grass Pokemon into play. It did have an ability like that in the Pokemon TCG physical form at one time, so maybe it'll do something like that. All right, who do we have left? I know, all right, there's the 2 trainers. They're both really good. We've got Dhelmise and Larvista. Dhelmise, kind of like Lapras, just has an attack that costs way too much energy to do anything, and Larvista will evolve into a Volcarona. Who knows what Volcarona will do? Finally, it is time to talk about the 2 new supporters, Blue and, not green, Leaf. And apparently, Leaf and Green are not confirmed to be the same character, but they're kind of the same character, so I don't know. This is the game's first ever Leaf card, and I think that's really cool. Blue is a supporter card that makes it so that your Pokemon take 10 less damage from your opponent's attacks during your opponent's next turn. I am really excited to see a card like this printed because I think it just makes games more interesting and allows for more counterplay where you're trying to predict if your opponent is running a card like Blue. Similar to Giovanni, you're trying to predict if your opponent has a Giovanni to be able to fix math. You want to try and suss out if your opponent has a Blue in their hand to try and disrupt your math, and I really like that ability to play and counterplay. You could even play a Giovanni to offset your opponent's Blue, and I think that this just makes the game more interesting. Leaf is a supporter card that my Hypno decks are very excited to see. It makes it so that your Pokemon's retreat cost is 2 less during the turn that you played it. So pretty much all of my Hypno decks can just stop playing X speed and just start playing 2 Leaf, since Hypno has a fat retreat cost of 2, and I hate having that thing in the active spot. Leaf is going to be an all-star in a lot of decks. I mean, there are only so many good supporters worth playing right now, and oftentimes when you play an X speed, you kind of wish that you had -2 retreat anyway. I'm thinking Moltres EX has a retreat cost of 2, Articuno EX has a retreat cost of 2, Mewtwo EX has a retreat cost of 2. I think a ton of decks are going to start playing Leaf and maybe cutting back on copies of X Speed. All right, y'all, that wraps it up for the Mythical Island initial reaction video. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point and you like the content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That would be fantastic and really cool of you to do. Y'all take it easy and have a good one. And make sure to join the Tricky Gym Discord to talk all things Pokemon. Discord.gg/TrickyGym. See ya.